Hi everyone. Thank you for signing up for this TÜV SÜD Expert live stream on Industry 4.0 readiness and evolution of manufacturing. Before we hand the time over to our expert, I will go through some basic housekeeping to keep this session as smooth as possible. Firstly, we have participants calling in from various locations, hence you are automatically placed on mute to reduce background noise. If you are facing any audio issues, please reach out to us, the host, via the chat function. Secondly, this is a 20-minute session which includes some time for questions and answers. At any time during this session, you can send in your questions directly to the panelists through the Q&A function, and we will address these questions as we go. And lastly, this session will be recorded and made available on demand later. And with that, I will hand the time over to our expert, Mr. Jackie Tan.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar series. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Jackie Tan from TÜV SÜD Digital Service. I'm primarily responsible for the Industry 4.0 business segment whereby we help companies to realize their Industry 4.0 transformation journey. In the past years, I've been involved in developing standards, of course, readiness to help companies to understand their Industry 4.0 status, and of course, helping them along the journey in their factory transformations. Now, in this webinar or in this webcast, I'd like to present 4 topics just to give everyone a good understanding about how is this industry observation going on right now in manufacturing, the evolution of manufacturing globally, how we see companies has evolved throughout the last years, a case studies on, let's say, flexible manufacturing and operations within this pandemic environment, and of course, finally, any questions and answers. Now, what we see so far based on our industry observations in this pandemic time is that 41% actually are trying to identify where and how could they start their Industry 4.0 transformation journey. These situations, what we see so far, it can really lead to lack of focus, whereby companies now are really having a very siloed projects in their improvement initiative. So we do see that there's many companies right now are very, let's say, focusing in what they need to addressing, let's say, technical issues. And because of that, we also see that companies, let's say, struggling to identify resources or struggling to manage the resources. This can lead to companies acting in a very unclear or reactive approach in their, let's say, transformation journey. Second point, what I'd like to share with you is that 23% of the companies we have evaluated so far are still defining the roadmap and blueprint for their transformations. And these situations, very often we see this leads to missed opportunities whereby companies does experience delay or significantly delays in their strategy development and of course subsequent implementations. And a second point is that we do see that companies are also losing market shares and competitiveness. Very often we see companies now, they do have somewhat a strategy for their factory transformations, but very often there's not let's say a robust roadmap or even a governance plan for companies in their transformation journey. So that could be a challenges for companies in terms of missing opportunities or losing their market share. The third point, we do see that 19% of our companies face challenges in their legacy systems and availability. What this means is that companies today do have challenges in terms of keeping up productivity, and we know that if you are from manufacturing environment, you know that productivity is always a key discussion point for manufacturers, and we do see this happening right now where companies really face challenges to keep their legacy systems up and running, and this also leads to a high operating cost whereby it signifies the quality management and low return in investment. So very often we see that companies face challenges in their legacy systems and availability. Last but not least, 17% of companies share with us that the lack of operations and supply chain visibility. What we mean by visibility represents real-time visibility. Very often we see companies now, they're really struggling to understand the actual status of their manufacturing environments, right? If you are from manufacturing world, again, remember there's a 5 M's we always discuss, right? The man, the method, the machines, the materials, and of course the measurements. So these 5 M's, very often companies have challenges in identifying real-time information in the operational, let's say, excellence environments. And we do see that 17% of companies are really trying to get a better grip of their operations, let's say, status. This leads to missing transparency, whereby there's a missing transparency between the factory and, of course, the supply chain. Of course, the management team may struggle to make the right decisions. They are not being agile to make the right decisions at any given situations. And of course, this leads to reductions in the company's speed and flexibility. So this area, the last point, lack of operations and supply chain visibility, is really what companies should really look into. How can they improve the operational, let's say, transparency, especially in this pandemic time, right? Now, as some of you may know, that we, TÜV SÜD, as a company, we actually have evaluated more than 300 companies worldwide using the Smart Industry Readiness Index series frameworks. What we have seen so far, based on our insights, based on the data we collected and analyzed, we do see that connectivity is the biggest gap that companies has in terms of their shop floor, enterprise, and of course, the facility itself. As you know, that very often, if you speak to any manufacturers, or if you are from manufacturing world, automations forms the basics for industrial transformation, right? Very often, you will need to deploy automations for your factory, different robotic tools, different machine tools to automate certain tasks as fast as possible. However, we also do see that in this digital age, data is the new oil, isn't it? So connectivity become more and more critical. Companies will really want to see a real-time connectivity of the organization. If you do your research, if you search for real-time SF factory enterprises, you are able to get more insights what it means by real-time. But what we mean in our terms, real-time connected organizations, it represents that the companies enables, let's say, is able to perform extensive and effective machine-to-machines and human-machines communication. That's number one, right? You are able to communicate faster between machines and machines, and of course, human-to-machines information. You're able to translate information faster, and you are able to provide accurate and real-time information across your different, let's say, supply chain management. Second point, real-time supply chain management. So moving from a reactive approach to now a proactive planning and preparation, right? And you may see this very often. Companies may deploy, for example, robotics process automation, RPA, to really enable what we call a supply chain asset management within the organizations. And of course, there are companies who also deploy what we call a supply chain platform, such that you can see a real-time visibility of their supply chain environment. This you see very often from the FMCG industry. The third point, generation of insights and decentralized decision making. Now, very often, if you have a huge supply chain management platform, you typically want to have insights as fast as possible, and of course, you would like to decentralize decision making by the relative stakeholders as efficient or as effective as possible. So connectivity really allows the enterprises, the organizations to achieve such a requirement, and we do recommend, if you are starting your Industry 4.0 transformation journey, you may want to start with looking into how connected is your machines, how connected is your enterprise, and how connected is your supply chain to start with before deploy any automation systems. Because very often companies deploy automations effectively, but it's always in silo, all right? A silo automation system, a silo machines. So we do recommend, if you deploy any new technologies or new systems to your organization, do evaluate how does this improve in your connectivity. Now, one of the key concepts for Industry 4.0 is really what we call a flexible supply chain and operations. And with this being said, horizontal integrations will be a key chapters that you as an individual should must really get a good understanding about this area. What we mean by horizontal integrations, this is effectively the optimizations, the flow of data and product information from suppliers through the companies and finally to your customers. So how do you establish an end-to-end business operation model with your organization? We do see that horizontal integration is the key area that you as a company, you as an individual should be able to communicate with your partners, with your stakeholders. What it means by that, by having a advanced level horizontal integrations, you're able to increase supply chain resilience, you're able to see your performance of your suppliers or your customers real time. You are able to increase workforce efficiency such that you can plan and execute processes as effective as possible with real time and connected information. And of course, you are being agile such that you are able to make real time decision making via potentially simulation of scenarios. So we hear that from many technology providers about how can they establish a real-time organization, real-time supply chain, but ultimately, the concept that you may want to really get an understanding of is really via horizontal integration. The diagram on the right-hand side, just to give you an illustrative how a companies could achieve an horizontal integrated product life cycle and of course their supply chain. In these slides, I just want to give you an overview of future of manufacturing. Just now in my table of content, I share with you what are our observations right now in the current state of manufacturing towards the future state of manufacturing, isn't it? So let me go through with you step by step. I hope you can see it clearly. I know there's too much to digest, but I will try to make it as clear as possible in the next, let's say, 20 minutes. Number one, IT and data collection, isn't it? Today, we do see that companies uses offline data collections and IT systems to improve critical operating parameters. That's typically what we see as a first step. In the future, we actually see companies now, especially if you look into the global MNC, they are actually deploying real-time system analytics and intelligent sensors control to enable flexible manufacturing operations. Now you can see that companies are moving from offline data collections to real-time system analytics and intelligent sensor control. In the manufacturing process and design, very often if you are from a manufacturing world or you are from a design world, you do deploy Lean Six Sigma to standardize processes and of course to reduce waste, right? That's a norm. It's all around operational excellence. However, in the future steps or even right now what we see, Lean Six Sigma or Lean initiatives are actually combined with digitalizations and sensor data to monitor and even to simulate detailed process parameters and optimization. So right now we do see a convergence of Industry 4.0 and Lean manufacturing principles together. So there's a convergence of these two elements. So we do also recommend to you, do look into how could you deploy Lean initiative converging with Industry 4.0 concepts. Now across asset and equipment management, we do see that companies today, they schedule downtime. There's a planned downtime where they maintain the assets using certain principles such as OEE, overall equipment effectiveness. Now, what we see also companies, let's say the lead companies in the leadership teams, they're also discussing how could they deploy sensor-based health monitoring to drive maintenance activities, potentially using condition monitoring approach, or even deploy certain predictive potential anomalies. So we do see that companies are also, let's say, starting to investigate how can they deploy sensor-based health monitoring approach to their assets instead of OEE, because OEE per se, of course, is a wonderful metrics to measure your equipment effectiveness, but how do you drive the next level of improvement? This is where companies are looking into how can they deploy sensor-based health monitoring systems. Now, quality. In the quality business functions, we do see that companies today, of course, they do scheduled sampling with manual inspections, right? They do manual sampling and manual inspection using 2D visual systems. In what we see right now, also in companies as well, we do see that companies are now deploying real-time in-process product quality monitoring that fits into what we call a cyber physical system. So you're able to see your products, your operations, your quality, not only in the physical world, but you're also able to see digitally using the concept of cyber physical systems, and of course, augmented 3D inspections and validations with others sensor feedback. So there's more and more technologies that has been deployed to improve quality, all right, and of course to make quality, let's say, business function more effectively. In the supply chain management world, of course, we do see that inventories, raw material, logistic tracking are always added by their, by barcodes. You do deploy barcodes and label tagging systems to manage your inventory. Of course, to monitor inventory using certain, let's say, warehouse management system. But actually, if you look into leaders in manufacturing right now, if you look into that, actually companies are deploying supply chain platform to manage and execute real-time inventory status and supply chain tracking. So actually companies are looking into how can they deploy supply chain platform to manage the suppliers more effectively and of course in real-time basis. In the workforce management, we do see that there's a skills assessment matrix, right? Every company does has a basic level of skills assessment matrix being curated by the HR team and tracked offline, right? You may do every year checks to know where are your workforce competency. Now, actually, if you are coming from a Industry 4.0 approach, right, there should be a regular continuous workforce development management plan, right? You do look into how can you real-time monitor your workforce performance and help them throughout this digitalization, let's say, program. Because any projects, any solutions you deploy to the organization, there's a need for you to look into how can you perform upskilling or even reskilling of your existing workforce. So we do recommend, if you're from HR departments, do look into how could you deploy continuous, let's say, workforce development program to your organization. Now, across the enterprise processes, right, we do see that many enterprise processes are done using analog tools. Example, companies start to, today companies use Excel spreadsheets, email-based, or even paper ledger to manage the enterprise processes, right? For example, procurement, sourcing, or even, let's say, as simple as an inventory check, right? Very often we see there's quite a tedious analog tools that has been deployed by organization. Now, if you look into an effective or efficient organizations, most of the enterprise processes are being automated through advanced computer-based systems, right? For example, companies does deploy, for instance, robotics process automation to automate repetitive tasks, and of course, to allow the employee to take on more critical tasks such as decision making, right? Instead of doing manual entry to their organizations. With this being said, I'd also like to share with you just a quick case study of one company that actually embarked on Industry 4.0. And this case study itself, I want to share with you how they actually established themselves as a smart factory and, of course, as a smart supply chain in this pandemic time, right? The company itself is called Henkel. It's a German company. Actually, they produce quite a huge number of parts or products itself. I believe they have about 44 factories globally, and there's around at least 70 products they manufacture for the world as well. So some of the brands that you see may be familiar to you, isn't it? I hope it's familiar, of course. Now, this company is, of course, is a world-leading chemicals and consumer goods companies. The major divisions are namely in the laundry, home care and adhesive technology, and of course, beauty care, right? When they first started a couple of years ago in their Industry 4.0 journey, the challenges was that there's a huge market demand, right? Because they are from FMCG, let's say, industry. There's a fast-moving consumer goods, right? If you're not sure what FMCG stands for, fast-moving consumer goods, right? There's a demand from the market that they have to be faster, cheaper, and of course, more agile processes, right? Having more SKU in the market and able to, let's say, react to the customer demand. There's also a need for them to improve OEE, overall equipment effectiveness, and of course, reduce specific energy consumptions for sustainability. As you know, in the chemicals industry world, there's a high consumption of energy, so they have been having this vision to really reduce specific energy consumption for their factory. The last point, and they also has a wish to really have a better visibility and transparency, not only for the factory, but actually for the supply chain itself, supply chain and factories. So they actually wanted to establish a better visibility and transparency for their factory and supply chain. This is where they start to really look into how could they adopt an agile and lean approach to ensure they don't get left behind in a competitive and dynamic market. Now, what they have done, their approach, first of all, they deployed two concepts I'd like to share with you. The first one is a digitally enabled real-time global OE boosting platform, right? So what they've done, they actually deploy a platform, right? A platform, or we can call it an IoT gateway that actually connects all the factory assets, machinery, and computer-based systems, such that they have one single source of truth. That's number one, that they wanted to achieve a single source of truth across the entire factories under Henkel. Of course, the second point, they want to make sure that the data they collected from the assets, from the machineries, and from computer-based systems can be analyzed remotely, real-time remotely. So that's what they've done. They want to make sure that first of all, they connect all the assets, and secondly, they're able to analyze the data remotely. Second point that they have done is digitally integrated end-to-end demand sensing. This is where they deploy a cloud computing to integrate the factories, processes, warehouse, and of course the supply chain, right? They actually integrate the supply chain together to have a standardizations of measurements and calculations of KPIs. So you can see that they deploy an Industry 4.0 concepts plus lean principles to have what they call the digitally integrated end-to-end demand sensing. The image on the left-hand side just share with you a typical, let's say, supply chain platform they actually design and deploy to the organizations to connect all their factories and, of course, their factories. What the business impact they have delivered so far, or they have acquired so far, actually the research from WEF Forum stated that there's a 50% increase in the overall equipment effectiveness, 20% increase in forecast accuracy. I think this is a very important point, especially in this pandemic time. You really need to make sure that you have a more, let's say, as accurate as possible forecast for your business. 12% in logistic costs, and finally 10% in their overall processing cost. So you can see moving from a classical lean approach towards what we call a lean and digitalization approach in establishing their smart factory and their smart supply chain. They also have been recognized by the World Economic Forum as an end-to-end connected digital lighthouse. So I do recommend you can take this as a best practices if you wanted to establish your organization, your factory as a smart factory using lean principles and Industry 4.0 concepts together to move or even to transform your factory. Now, how would you start, or how would TÜV SÜD recommend you to start your Industry 4.0 transformations? First of all, based on our experience, when we conducted the Smart Industry Readiness Index assessment to our clients, we do see that research shows that there's a slow adoption of Industry 4.0 implementations. Company really trying to get a better grip what is Industry 4.0, but we do know that in this pandemic time, Industry 4.0 is more than vital for you to, let's say, manage and execute your processes remotely within organizations. Second point, we also do see that there's a need to prioritize your projects. There's also a need to prioritize your initiatives such that you can, let's say, better formulate an effective Industry 4.0 roadmap and strategy. So we do hear from our clients that how could they prioritize the projects? We have a list of initiatives. How could I prioritize them? The third point, companies also share with us that we need some sort of, let's say, informed decision making in order to make a better or effective resources allocation, right? Because such as there's so many projects, how could they actually make the right decisions and effectively deploy the right resources to the right project? So that's also in resources management. Companies also wanted to understand how could they make better focus area decisions in the, let's say, transformation journey. And last point, we do see that the Smart Industry Readiness Index was an effective approach that we developed together with Singapore government to help companies in effectively understanding your Industry 4.0 journey and, of course, prioritizing your specific projects. Now, just one last key point for everyone to take away is that if you wanted to start your transformation journey towards Industry 4.0, there are 3 steps we do recommend you to start with. Step number 1 is really initiation. So we do recommend you as a company start initiating your projects or your transformation journey by understanding the concepts of Industry 4.0. That's number 1. Create a baseline. Try to know where you are today. Establish a readiness of your organization towards Industry 4.0, and of course, identify gaps. Where could be your strength and weakness. That's typically what we say a company should start with. Start with initiating by developing understanding and readiness of your organization. Number 2, solutioning. This is where we start to recommend companies, once you understand your status, you know your strength and your weakness. Step 2 is really around defining a roadmap, right? Defining a blueprint. What could be your future step look like according to your vision? Start to establish a vision for your organization, a vision for your factory, and within this vision, you can start to derive what could be the future steps to achieve that vision, and of course, determines the business impact, right? Very often, for every project that you want to deploy for your companies, for your organization, there's always a need for return of investment, right? What could be the return on investment for the specific projects or solutions? So we do recommend, do measure that ROI before you start implementing. And the third point, specify the solutions, identify the right solutions that helps you to achieve your future steps and the potential vendors, right? The third point, implementations and operation. This is where once you have identified the specific projects, you should also look into how does this link to achieve your final target, right? Your target is maybe having a real-time connected organizations. How is this being aligned to the overall vision, right? So do look into when you integrate or when you implement certain projects, do look into how could you make sure that this is fully aligned, fully integrated to your organizations. It meets the quality, performance target, and of course, it should be safe, secure, and reliable operations. So these are the 3 steps approach that we do recommend companies to start on with their Industry 4.0 transformation journey. So once again, step 1, initiation, step 2, solutioning, step 3, implementations, and of course, operations. With this being said, I've come to the end of my, let's say, quick 20 minutes presentations. Of course, I thank you for your time. Now, maybe I'll pass it to Corinne for, of course, your questions, if any.
Thank you, Jackie. That was really insightful. We'll now take questions from the audience, and there was quite a few that actually came in through the Q&A function. So let's go through them, Jackie. The very first question we have, what time frame do you see in order to transform Indian automotive industry to be Industry 4.0 compliant?
What time frame?
Yeah.
Yeah, in India, right? There is no specific time frame for India as a country, right? If you were to come from, let's say, a company specific, right? Maybe I can elaborate by distinguishing between SME and MNC, right? A small medium enterprises and a multinational company, right? In India, for say, yeah. So for SME, right? For small medium enterprises, we do recommend you start having a planning horizon, 3 to 6 months actually. To plan out what could be your quick wins projects in your Industry 4.0 journey. So SME per se, we do recommend a 3 to 6 months planning horizons. And if you are from MNC, right, if you are from multinational companies, we do recommend having a 3 years vision, a planning horizon, a strategic planning horizon of 3 years to derive your transformation journey. So that would be what my recommendation. If you are from SME, 3 to 6 months. If you are MNC, potentially a 3 years strategic planning horizons in your planning of your projects.
Thanks, Jackie. All right, here's another question. But before I go into the questions as well, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please send them through the Q&A function. And if we are unable to answer them all today, don't worry, Jackie will get back to you after this session itself. All right, so the next question that we have, what is the difference between Industry 4.0 and the IIoT?
All right, sure. Okay, so if you look into Industry 4.0 itself, right? Industry 4.0 is actually a concept, and there are 6 principles within the concept itself. So companies need to really understand what are the 6 principles of Industry 4.0. I can share this offline, maybe not in this current time, but there's actually a 6 principles how companies can establish themselves as an Industry 4.0 company. Now, let me share with you IIoT, right? Industrial Internet of Things. That's really how you integrate, like I said, internet to things, right? It's really sensors enable, let's say, data collections, right? So basically, when we come to a companies who wanted to deploy IIoT, right? It's really about how could you deploy certain, let's say, devices or certain sensors to your machines such that you are able to monitor or even to collect data, let's say, remotely, right? Because it's enabled by Internet of Things. So there's quite a distinctive difference between IIoT and Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 is really a concept, and there are 6 principles that you may need to understand before you derive the specific Industry 4.0 projects. IIoT is one example of technologies that you can deploy to achieve an Industry 4.0, let's say, organizations.
Great. Thanks, Jackie. All right. Looking at the time, I don't think we have a lot left. So here's one last question. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A function, and we will get back to you after this session. So this last question that we have, connectivity tool in process management seems to be lacking in PDCA cycle to regularize in this pandemic time. How this can be tackled in current time?
Right. Yeah. That's a very good question actually. Connectivity, as I mentioned, itself is quite a important aspect for Industry 4.0, right? Because ultimately integrations is one of the key element of Industry 4.0. And connectivity itself, especially in the process management, could be lacking in PDCA cycle potentially. But what you could actually do is that think about if you deploy Lean principles, right? You do practices DMAIC, right? DMAIC, right? Design, measure, analyze, improve, and control, isn't it? To improve your processes. So you may want to look into how could you deploy DMAIC as well to improve your connectivity, right? Every incident, every quality issues, or every, let's say, request or feedback from customers, from clients, you may want to look into how could you connect your DMAIC principles to your PDCA cycle, of course, to have an effective data collections and effective analysis of the specific situations that you may receive from your client. So I do recommend deploy DMAIC together with digitalizations to improve your organizations.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. We hope you found this session interesting and relevant. And we've also prepared a survey that will pop up after this event ends to help us understand your interests. Please feel free to share your feedback on the survey. And we also have a series of expert live stream in the pipeline. Hence, we encourage you to visit our webpage, www.tuvsud.com/COVID-19-live-sessions to get more information on the topics. Thank you again for your time and have a good rest of the day ahead.